All right, Jeff Zimmerman here. I'm here with some legends of the combat sports in boxing and mixed martial arts, Hall of Fame referees, Kenny Bayless and Robert Byrd, and one of the top MMA UFC refs out there today, Mark Smith. How you guys doing?
Doing well.
Doing good. Doing good. Yes, sir.
So I know you guys got a big event coming up, or not event, I should say. You guys are producing a show together and, kind of interview celebrities and different guests and analysts and things like that and have fun, right? That's the name of the game. But before we get into that and talk about the show, I want to talk about you guys and your career because as you guys know, I've worked with Hall of Fame ref Richard Steele for many years. Learned a lot about the sweet science from him and love just talking shop. And no better to talk shop with the third guys in the ring or the cage, depending on what you do. So looking forward to it. So let me start with Kenny. Talk about how you got into the game. Like I tell people all the time, this is not a sport you go to an HR department at a company and interview for. How did you make your way into becoming one of the top refs in boxing?
Well, Jeff, for me, it started after I moved from California to Las Vegas. I had never even been to a boxing match, but Muhammad Ali happened to come. I arrived in Las Vegas, August of '72, and the first world title fight that I ever witnessed was in February of 73, and that was Muhammad Ali fighting a guy by the name of Joe Bugner. And I just that did it for me. I had watched Ali on my mom's black and white television in California for years, but seeing it live just resonated in me. And from that point on, I went to every fight card in Las Vegas. And at some point, I wanted to get more involved, but I didn't know anything about boxing. So I ended up getting involved in the amateur Golden Gloves as a judge. And I had judged for a few years, and I was comparing my score to one of the professional judges by the name of Jerry Roth. I'm sure you've heard of that name. And Jerry looked at me and said, you appear to be in pretty good shape. Why don't you try refereeing? And my first response was, no, I don't want to get in the ring with those guys. And I thought about it and I said to myself, well, why not give it a try? So Richard Steele had just moved from Southern California to Vegas as a referee. And I asked Richard, would he show me the sweet science of officiating? And he took me to, I'm sure you heard of Hal Miller's gym, which was on Washington. Richard took me there, got me in the ring, and the rest is history.
And the rest is history, as they say. And Robert, I know you have a history with Richard, I believe from the Marines.
Absolutely.
And going back to California, right? Doing some stuff with the California Commission. Talk about how you got started and became one of the top refs in the world as well.
Well, after I got out of service, yeah, we were both on the Marine Corps boxing team, along Richard, Kenny Norton. It was a hell of a team. After I got out, there's a gym in Los Angeles at the time it was called Jake Shagru's. Later it became Hoover Street Gym. And that's where Kenny and Bossman Jones, Hedgeman Lewis, Mondo Ram, that's where they all trained. And I just go up there just really to harass the fighters, but my story really goes back to, at the time I was working security for the Governor Reagan. and we were in Sacramento, and I was on my way back from Sacramento, and Eileen Eaton was on the commission at the time, and she used to always tease me, you know, how many girls you done beat up? Hell of a lady, hell of a lady. And at any rate, I got her pre-boarded onto the plane, and once I did that, when we got time to go, I was just going to go on and walk back. And she'd go, hey, come here, sit down. And so we talked all the way down to LA. And she said, you know what? On Monday, I want you to go see Joe Olmos, which was the commissioner. And you tell him that I want him to test you and put you on as a referee. And I said, okay, because once I leave this plane, I'm thinking, I ain't doing that. But that lady was very persistent. She called Joe. Joe called me, said, would you please come by and take the test so that I can get her off my back? So I did. I took the test. I passed it. Then the next step was I want you to go out and jip with Richard Steele, and he's going to show you the ropes. Well, that was easy. I went to the gym and he started showing me the things about refereeing and all that. And I'm still not really convinced, you know, but I'm doing this because it's Richard and because I don't want Miss Eaton on me. And then Richard called me 1 week. He said, hey, I need help. Can you come down and help me out? It was a Los Angeles Police Athletic League. They were doing a smoker at the LAPD Academy. And I said, well, yeah, okay, I'll come down. And I went down, and it was the little peewees that were fighting. And I mean, the gloves were bigger than they were, you know. And I tell you, it was so honest, you know. All of that was so honest, and I fell in love with it. That did it for me, you know.
The
And
common
so,
theme I heard from both of you, Richard Steele had a big impact on both of your careers.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because in Mark, we're going to get to you, MMA and UFC. You hear all about boxing and the cutthroat sport, and the black eyes, and the fraud and the corruption. And Richard doesn't tell these stories. I hear it from guys like Robert and Kenny. Richard, he just does what he does. He's just, who he is, helping guys, but Mark, man, UFC, but your story also served the country in the Air Force, F-16 fighter pilot. I know you did some stuff with the White House. Talk about your background and how you got into working the biggest fights in the UFC.
So I was in the Air Force, flying F-16s all around the world. And I was stationed here in Las Vegas, 2002 to 2005. I've been doing martial arts and other stuff all throughout my career. But I left for a couple years. I did a tour at the White House, worked for President Bush, and then I went to graduate school for a year. Decided to come back to Las Vegas. When I came back to Las Vegas, I wanted to pick things up with my first boxing coach, Skipper Kelp, over at JSEC, otherwise known as Fight Capital. And I started doing a little bit more Muay Thai. My Muay Thai instructor, Marvin Eastman, was going to be gone for a couple weeks to do a fight. So he actually asked me to teach his class. In the midst of teaching the class, we had a special guest come in, said he wanted to have a couple fighters come over the next day, do a little bit of sparring, and asked if I wouldn't mind getting in there with them just to help officiate. Well, that person wound up being Dana White, president, CEO of the UFC, brought a couple fighters in, put them in the ring. I really had never done any officiating for fighting before, but obviously I like watching it on TV, got in there, moved around with them. Dana asked me if that's something I would like to do, interested, getting into officiating. So he directed me to Toughen Up, a big amateur promotion here in town. I started off doing judging. I said, man, I really like this refereeing thing. So I would keep practicing. Whenever fighters would get inside the ring or inside the cage, I'd get in there, move with them, learn the rules. That started to pick up till one day one of the commissioners came in, same type of story. One of the commissioners came into the gym, said, hey, we want you to start doing some refereeing. So in 2008, I started doing both. Commission brought me up to eventually, after about a year, to be a professional. And then for a long time, I was really the only certified person in the state of Nevada that was doing both refereeing and judging. Pretty tasking responsibility, trying to concentrate on one or the other, but I was afforded the opportunity to do both. And then both boxing and MMA, with this being the fight capital of the world, I started getting more and more fights and started moving, working my way up the card to eventually pay-per-view, main events, title fights, and the rest is history. Here we are.
Right. So did you do boxing as well, Mark? Did you ref boxing?
I boxed at the Air Force Academy, which I will throw a little jab at my Marine brothers there. The Air Force Academy boxing team historically has been the best collegiate boxing team in the world. Over a number of years, we've beaten everybody. A couple times we maybe handed a trophy to the Marines or the Army or something like that. But it was a mandatory program at the Air Force Academy. But I would say my foundation was in Muay Thai and kickboxing. Since my first instructor, Marvin Eastman, that was his foundation. But I do dab in all of them, all combat sports.
But did you ever referee boxing in Nevada, or just mixed martial arts?
Only at the amateur level, only in the smoker level, but never professionally. It's really challenging to do both. For example, I believe next week we're going to have a boxing match the same night that we have a UFC match. In a couple weeks, we have a slap fight the same night as we have a UFC fight. So sometimes you have to pick one or the other. And just the doors of opportunity will open up for me on the MMA side, and I hopped to that. MMA is a little bit more challenging anyway, so I wanted to bring myself to a little bit higher level. And, try that instead of just sticking to the simple boxing stuff.
Yeah, but boxing's kind of easy, right?
Yeah, just the old 1-2s, but you got to do everything else in mixed martial arts.
You mentioned Marvin Eastman. He fought for us when I was promoting MMA with Richard in Vegas, Steel Cage. If you remember that promotion around 2007, Marvin Eastman was our main event a couple times. He was a hell of a fighter.
Yeah, I owe a lot to Marvin. Obviously teaching me the aspects of Muay Thai and kickboxing, and being an inspiration. Now there's obviously a fine balance there. Once you become official, maintain a professional relationship. But I could never do a Marvin Eastman fight because that was my original coach. So we still maintain a great mentorship.
Yeah, and talk about, Mark, your mentors. We mentioned Richard Steele for Kenny and Robert, but you had some mentors too, Big John McCarthy and Herb Dean, two of the best ever.
Absolutely. I would say I was very fortunate, very blessed. When I first started doing this, the big names on the block were John McCarthy and Herb Dean. In some ways, to get proficient, you can't take formal courses. And two of the best courses in the world are taught by Herb Dean and John McCarthy. So Herb challenged me to come out and take his class. It's a 2-day class out in California, which I did, and it went very well. And I wound up making it to, Herb calls it his dean's list, where his top officials get put on the list, and that we get other teaching opportunities. He basically puts you in a teaching role alongside him. And then once that was complete, I wanted to challenge myself even more. I decided to take John McCarthy's course, which I will say, Herb's course is hard. John McCarthy's course is very hard. A very small pass rate. And not that he wants to intentionally fail people, but he challenges people to be the absolute best. So in order to be able to pass his course, you have to be 100% proficient. And I wound up passing both of them. And Herb is still a great mentor and friend today, since John is retired, since moved on. But Herb and I talk all the time about, where our sport is going to go, rules, changes, fights that we saw, things that we've never seen before, types of knockouts, etc. And then, of course, that's on the MMA side. But having mentors and friends and guidance from Kenny and Robert, that's invaluable as well as a up and coming official.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, guys, because you hear about it like in football, like the coaching trees, and Bill Parcells has all these different guys that become NFL coaches, and you don't hear a lot of that in like mixed martial arts or combat sports, right? Richard Steele obviously has his referee tree with you guys and Tony and the late great Mitch Halpern. You know, talk about, I mean, you guys are all professional. Everyone has egos, competitive. And here you're talking about helping MMA and boxing and just helping each other. There's only one big fight every so often, although the UFC seems to do a big fight every week. But like in boxing, Robert, there's only so many, you know, humongous fights, and I know you've done some of them. How is that, you know, the camaraderie? How do you balance that and wanting to get those big fights, but yet, you know, you have respect for your fellow ref?
Well, I think it really gets down to how you view the game and what your priorities are in as far as the game. And my priorities were always the sport itself, because the sport, without the sport, who needs you? So respect for the sport, respect for the fighters and all the things that they do to prepare themselves to be the best that they can be. And after that, then, you know, it's about being respectful of the commissions that you work for, and then respectful of your peers. Okay. My thing has always been, if you want to be a professional, then you have to work at it. It's not something that you can just do. And that's ingrained in me. And so once I started to learn all the aspects of the game, and I had some good mentors, very good mentors, and then you take from each of them and then make it your own. Okay. But the one thing that I focused on, and when I teach, that's what I focus on. Number one, you got to know the rules.
Right.
Okay. And number two thing that's most important, in my opinion, is positioning. Knowing the rules and being in the proper position to make the right call at the right time and in the right way. So if you do those things and you focus on those things and you concentrate on continually improving in that area, because rules change. So you got to keep yourself knowledgeable of the rules. And when I teach, that's how I teach. You got to know the rules. The rules drive your mechanics, and the mechanics is what allows you to tell everybody what it is that you're doing in there. And my thing has always been that if you consistently work hard at your craft, sooner or later it will pay off, and it has.
Yeah, no doubt. Hall of Famer. And Kenny, you know, same question. I mean, you guys were kind of the next heir from like the Richard Steele, Joe Cortez, Mills Lane. You guys kind of carried the torch into the next generation with when Mayweather hit his stride and Pacquiao and stuff like that. You know, when you're waiting for that call or for the commission to make that decision, I mean, what is that feeling like? You know, you guys may be working the same card, but only one of you is going to get the main event.
Exactly. And I first ditto what Byrd said in preparation. Preparation is everything. And for me, you know, after I got started, there were guys, you mentioned them, that were ahead of me. Richard obviously was, Mills Lane was. For me, it was just developing the patience for when it's my turn. And one may say that I may have waited quite a bit of time because Carlos Padilla had come from the Philippines, and he got on our commission. Joe Cortez came from Atlantic City. He got on our commission. So I just had to be patient and wait. And I remember back in the day when Mike Tyson was big, and when I finally got appointed, I wanted to do a Mike Tyson fight so bad I could feel it, and it never happened. Was I frustrated? Well, sure, I was a little frustrated because I felt my work was just as good as anyone else, but I had to serve my time.
Right.
And just like you mentioned, Jeff, I served my time. And when I did finally get that call, my first big super fight was when Oscar De La Hoya fought Bernard Hopkins.
Mhm.
And I know Byrd was happy for me because when I climbed in the ring, he looked up at me and gave a big smile on his face because he knew I was ready for it because of the length of time I had to wait for that moment. But at the same time, I was able to study Richard. I was able to study Mills. I was able to study Carlos. I was able to study Joe Cortez, as well as Vic Draculich, Robert Byrd himself, all the guys that were there. Every time they stepped in the ring, I was studying them so that I could better myself, and it paid off in the long run.
It sure did. It sure did. And you guys all have your own distinct style. Like I can just picture you guys in the ring right now, doing the fights and so forth. And Mark, I wrestled in high school, but I've been a boxing fan my whole life. I don't cover MMA as a sport. It seems so complex with, jiu-jitsu, the ground game, the submissions, the arm bars, everything. You started from the ground up, to feel comfortable when you got these guys in there that could kick, can punch, can submit, talk about the preparation and just getting into the cage with these guys.
Yeah, so my background is probably a little bit non-traditional from some of the other leading MMA referees. A handful of them are former fighters or maybe teach full-time in one of the combat sports. But the first thing for me in selection of a fight, I have nothing to do with that. It's my responsibility, like Robert Kenny said, to be as prepared as possible, to know the rules better than anybody. And the way I would do it, I started from the basics. I would watch, and then either in jiu-jitsu or in sparring or in boxing, I would have one of the coaches, let's say jiu-jitsu, for example, I would have one of the coaches standing next to me and say, we're going to put this submission on. I want you to understand where the pressure point is, where you can look for where a bone is going to snap, what you need to look for, the appendage itself, a fighter to tap, the verbal call that they can make. And then I would put myself in different positions around the fighter. And I think from that basic perspective, building it from scratch, that's how I perfected it. And I would do that in each aspect of the sport. The catch wrestling, submission, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, and then getting a better understanding of at what level of a fight that you're watching. In the amateurs, I'm going to stop the fight a lot earlier. If someone is not intelligently defending themselves, or if they're not demonstrating a capability to get out of a submission, I'm going to stop it. If it's a higher tier fight, I'm going to set that expectation starting off in the locker room, getting a rapport with the fighters and letting them know exactly what they can expect from me. And then understanding where you are. If it's a main event, UFC at T-Mobile with 23,000 people, if I have a fighter in there that has a propensity to come back for maybe a little bit, harder of a fight, I'm probably going to let that go. But always keeping in mind, safety of the fighters is first and foremost. Rules and everything is important, positioning and everything. But I got to get all that stuff right in context to keep my fighters safe and continue practice. We've been lucky here in Vegas where we get fights almost every week, so I remain proficient. But I still go to the gym and do some of those basics like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and I know I reference Richard a lot. I'm talking to, you guys are legendary refs in your own right. And, Richard, as we all know, did what's considered by most the most controversial fight in history when he stopped Chavez Taylor with 2 seconds left. And I always tell people when it comes up, even though I'm very close to Richard, not to be an apologist, but, Taylor was not looking at him, wasn't, responding to him. and so forth. And I've heard Tony Weeks, being interviewed about that fight, and said he thought it was the most courageous decision. And Richard will tell you it doesn't matter if there's 2 seconds into a fight or 2 seconds left in a fight.
Right.
When a fighter's done, he's done. He's
right.
cheating. You're cheating the other guy
Mhm.
by not, calling it, based on what you see. What are your thoughts on that fight? And just, and Mark, I've seen you talk with Joe Rogan about it. That one punch too many or one punch too soon, and then you got the public, and you got now with social media and everything. Let me start with you, Robert. Just what are your thoughts of, history sees that fight a lot differently than it used to. Let's put it that way.
Well, I looked at it several times. And what I did was step back and said, what are my responsibilities as a referee? And then put myself in Richard's spot. And what he did was spot on, because he was, and I tell people who ask me about that, I said, you can see him looking him right in his face saying, are you okay? Are you okay? And he's looking off at his corner over there. And so when you're trying to see what is the status of this fighter, that fighter has to help you. It has to give you something to go by. And he didn't. He was looking off, and bottom line is, I don't know if at that time they had the little red lights on the ring here in Vegas, and everybody talks about that. But the bottom line is he is totally focused 18 inches away from this fighter. Totally focused on that, not the 2 minute, not the red lights and all of that. So from my perspective, he did exactly what he was supposed to do in the way that he was supposed to do it. And most of the people who were watching that, they were watching it with their pocketbook and their heart, not from our perspective.
Well, I'm sure you guys have heard Richard say if he goes to Mexico today, he's a national hero, but he won't set foot in Philadelphia.
Well, Jeff,
Yeah.
Jeff, if I could add to what Robert said, when Mildred Taylor looked to his right, he was looking at Lou Duva, because I was still an inspector with the commission at the time, and I was in Mildred Taylor's corner. And when Mildred Taylor went down, Lou Duva ran up on the ring apron. Why he did, I don't know. And that's what caused Mildred to look and not answer Richard, which, like Robert said, we would rather them stop with one punch sooner rather than one punch later. And when we took Mildred Taylor back to his dressing room, as soon as he got to his dressing room, he threw up blood. And the doctors came in, got him on a gurney, took him to the hospital, and they announced that Mildred Taylor had orbital blowouts over both eyes. He had swallowed the average of 2 pints of his own blood, and he was totally dehydrated. That's how beat up he was. So Richard did the right thing.
Yeah, and the argument that said, well, there was 2 seconds, he didn't get his glory, Chavez would not have gotten another punch. That's irrelevant, right?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
like you said, fighter safety, Mark, you said it. That's what counts.
That's what counts.
And it's funny, you mentioned the red lights. I asked Richard about that too. I think that was more for TV, right? But some fighters and people that I respect in the sport say, yeah, the time was there, the red lights, he knew how much time was left. But again, that doesn't matter whether he knows or not. I mean, so.
And that's what I was saying. You're focused totally on that fighter.
Right.
And you're looking for certain things. You're looking for certain feedback. And if you're not getting that, then you have to make the decision that you have to make.
Right.
Right. And Mark, your sport, again, you talked about when you start talking about appendages and snapping arms and, obviously if they're standing, it's a little bit different, but talk about, you got to make those calls too before you start seeing limbs hanging off.
Yeah, so there's a balance between the skill level of the fighters, and at the professional level, everyone signs up. We take it just a little bit further with still that safety in mind. But for a choke, if it's UFC, Bellator, PFL level, we're not going to stop that fight unless the fighter goes unconscious or if they submit, which is either verbally or a tap. For a limb, I tell them, I never want to see this, but if you don't tap or submit, I won't stop it until it breaks, dislocates, or separates. And simply because we have some fighters that are double jointed, very flexible. To the average eye, it may look like something that you want to stop. But if it doesn't break or if it doesn't separate or dislocate, you got to let them go. So, but again, back at that amateur level where the skill levels may not be as high, we're going to intervene a lot faster. Now, from the knockout perspective, it all comes down to, can you intelligently defend yourself? Right. And that would probably translate across both sports. Simply holding your hands up in a guard position with the power that these fighters have. You think about that fight coming up here in a couple of days, Joshua versus Ngannou. Covering my face is not intelligent defense. I either need to stop them, punch back, or move away. And it's just a matter of experience level, getting used to knowing when is the right time to stop it. And you guys may have seen that commercial years ago about that football coach yelling at the referee on the sideline. That happens all the time, from the coaches, from fighters, from fans. Amateur level, all the way up to professional level, you got to block that stuff out. Just focus on the two combatants there in front of you and know when is the best time to intervene if you have to as an official.
Like I said, Jeff,
go ahead, Robert.
Like I said, most people are looking at the contest based upon their wallet or their heart. Yeah. And that's not what drives us as officials, because every time we step into that ring, we steps into that cage, you have two people's life in your hand and their livelihood, but primarily their life. And so it doesn't get any more serious than that.
Exactly.
And, let me, just comparing the two sports, the UFC, as I think we'd all agree, has done, Dana White, an amazing job of the best fighting the best, right? So, the champion fights number one guy, 2 fights 3. I mean, up and down the card, those fights are usually pretty competitive. Where boxing, we hope the best will fight the best. So you hear more about the A and B side, I would say, in boxing. How is it, Kenny and Robert, where the A guy's supposed to win, he's coming in there and supposed to win, and you guys can't get caught up in who's supposed to win, and and the fans, like you said, Robert, and people's heart and their money, and just call it, like you see it. How do you block that out?
Well, for me, go ahead, Byrd.
No, go ahead, Ken. Mm-hmm.
No, for me, it I used to be like the average fan when I got hooked into boxing, and I would sit in front of the television and I would be jerking my head and dipping and dodging like I was in the fight, right, and yell and scream just like any normal fan. When I came a referee, I had to get rid of that. Right. I had to focus now on concentrating on what the fighters are doing, as opposed to the enjoyment that I used to get out of it. And that has kind of worked against me in a way, because now when I go to sporting events, even the NBA or the NFL, I may express myself some, but I'm still somewhat reserved. In boxing, I'm totally reserved
Right.
because it was a practice that I had to develop, because I can't be in the ring and be jerking and getting excited because a punch was thrown or a guy got knocked down. I have to keep my focus. I got to keep my train of thought, even when the fans are yelling and screaming, or the corners are screaming, like was mentioned, and do what I have been trained to do.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Your job is to manage the bout, manage it, okay, and nothing else matters.
Yeah.
Right.
Manage the bout. You're not a fan, like Kenny's saying. You're not a fan. You are, and I mind the words out. You're the bout manager.
That's a good way to put it. I've never heard that. And Mark, let me ask you, since you're obviously an adrenaline junkie, flying, fighter planes. I mean, compare, fighting or flying, piloting an F-16 fighter plane and being in the cage in a main event UFC with 23,000 people, T-Mobile Arena. How do those two compare?
Although two different worlds, I think the perspectives are identical. Flying that F-16 in a combat scenario, somebody shot at me. My goal is to not get hit. I got to accomplish my mission. And then what we tend to see here in the Nevada Commission is the boss has faith in me that he puts me in there most of the time with the bigger fighters. And the same type of thing. My goal is to not get hit. Although two different worlds, but we do have an objective. And maintaining safety of both of those is our responsibility. And we have the opportunity to work for, most often, especially during the pandemic, two of the greatest commissions in the world, if not the two greatest, both here in Nevada and California. And one thing I could say about those mismatches of fights, you're not going to see that in those two states, because the executive directors of both of those states, they get to propose matches from the promoters, and they do a match-making session. You're not going to have a 30-0 fighter fighting against somebody that's 2-1. So it's their part of the puzzle to maintain that safety of the fight and the entire promotion as well. But I will say this: you may have heard Joe Rogan and some other folks talk about that adrenaline dump. The first time you get inside that octagon in T-Mobile, and it's 20-some thousand people in there, it is pretty surreal. But what I did is, regardless of whether it's an amateur fight at the lower level or whether it's a UFC fight, once that door to the cage shuts, I got a competitor on my left and a competitor on the right. I owe them the justice of doing it right, whether it's an amateur fight or whether it's a UFC title fight. So I'm going to go about it the exact same way as a consummate professional, and try to have a little bit of fun in there, smiling. But as both gentlemen said, you got to maintain your business in there. So I keep a pretty serious face throughout the entirety of the bout.
Well, I'm here with Kenny Bayless, Robert Byrd, Boxing Hall of Fame referees, Mark Smith, one of the top MMA, UFC referees out there today, and got a new show coming up. We're going to get to it there. I got a few more questions for you guys. We had a little technical difficulty getting going, Mark, right? Because some of the old school boxing guys, kind
of drag them boxing guys along a little bit.
But we're here, and I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as I am, because hearing the stories and how you guys think and how you guys manage, like you said, Robert, how you manage a bout, I think is fascinating. But Mark kind of alluded to it, and I'm gonna have a little fun with this. Crossover fights. The first big crossover fight in most recent years, we all know, McGregor and Mayweather. And our friend Kenny here had gone public about not being a fan of the crossover fight, and therefore was not in the consideration for it. But here, his good friend Robert Byrd got that fight. So I want to hear from both of you, Kenny, because there's been a lot of and we'll get in. I mean, obviously, it's here to stay. At least as we sit here today, Kenny, why were you not a fan of it, and how do you feel about it today, with what's going on?
Well, I'll tell you, Jeff, when I was asked that question, I didn't know much about MMA. Well, first of all, before MMA was accepted in Nevada, our commission had a meeting with the MMA people, and they were showing us all the different strikes and hits and whatnots that the the sport possessed. And I sat in that meeting along with other referees, and I said to myself, this sport is too violent. I mean, you could hit with elbows. I mean, it was just like a street brawl, anything goes. And our commission turned it down. Well, there was a commissioner that was in that meeting room that decided to purchase MMA and clean up some of the strikes, clean up the rules a little bit. And it then got accepted. So between that time period, when I was asked about the crossover MMA and boxing, I was strictly speaking from a safety issue. And so when I was asked, I said, no, I wouldn't like to see a crossover because of the safety issue.
Right.
Well, apparently when that came out, they didn't mention the part that I said that I had a safety issue about it. They just only talked about the fact that I didn't agree with them crossing over. Now, if you were to ask me now, and time has proved itself, I can go over a few fights that I have witnessed and seen, boxer versus MMA. If the fight is boxing rules, then the advantage goes to the boxer. If the rules are MMA that a boxer has to fight, then the advantage goes to the MMA guy. So safety was basically my reason for making the comment that I did. And now seeing it over the years, I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah. Robert, you got the fight. What was that experience like?
Well, my focus has always been to I have this saying, I may fail in life, but it won't be because I was not prepared. And so my thing has just been all the time to be as best prepared as I can when I step through those ropes, because again, I got two people's life in my hand, and that's very serious, and I take it that way. I have their livelihood in my hand, and I take that. And so my thing was, because my belief was probably that Kenny was going to get the fight, because Kenny was the top guy. And so I hadn't even thought about it. And then when I got the call to do the fight, I said, well, what I need to do is make sure that it's the rules that apply are equally used in this fight, because it's huge. It's huge. And my personal opinion is that it was a major success. I think that it was I think that Floyd basically gave away the first three and a half rounds, and that was good because all the MMA people were saying, "Oh yeah, see, we told you, yeah, that's it." And then from about end of round 4, moving forward, then Floyd started. Now all the boxing people were going, "Yeah, okay, we told you, see." And so I think in the end analysis, it turned out to be a win-win-win. A win for MMA and the UFC, definitely a win for boxing, and a win for the people who promoted it. So it was a win-win-win proposition.
Mark, what are your thoughts on these fights? And you obviously, Francis Ngannou, a lot of people thought he beat Tyson Fury, knocked him down. now he's going to be back in there with Anthony Joshua this weekend. What are your thoughts on those fights? And, you know, big guys getting in there, and he's a novice boxer, but he held his own against the champ.
Yeah, you know, I think we hit the point earlier. If it's a historically under boxing rules, then the lifetime or proficient boxer is going to have an advantage. If it goes to the MMA side, that person is going to have an advantage. It's simply a matter of, you know, how do you practice? What do you do with the majority propensity of your time? And if we go back to the, you know, McGregor Mayweather was one, but we also had Randy Couture and James Toney a number of years before that. And I think that demonstrated, did Randy have a game plan to stand with him? Who knows? But he went to what his bread and butter was. But regardless of that, two fighters get inside the ring or the cage, we got to treat them under that rule set. And if we know in the back of our mind, we do fighter study ahead of time, that someone is more proficient in a specific area than someone else. If we know that fighter A is a boxer, the other person has a mixed martial arts background, we have to evaluate the fight as such. But all of us are also fans of the sport. And I would say for the boxing side and MMA side, that Mayweather-McGregor fight ignited the combat community to, you know, how many people tuned in. The Fury and Ngannou fight ignited combat sports. And if things were starting to fall off, where in some of the sports, maybe you're only getting the mega fights, well, those mega fights are worth it. You know, it's worth the wait, if you want to call it that, in anticipation of what you're going to see. These fights coming up, I'm going to be watching. And, you know, we have to remain neutral as officials, but I'm going to watch and learn to see how proficient, you know, one person has gotten if he's trying to transition into another sport, and then try to encourage maybe some boxers to switch over and come over to the MMA side. But as a fan, I love it. As an official, incredible opportunities for us to get some fighters traditionally from the other side to officiate them that I may never have the chance to have seen them.
You know, the other thing, Jeff, is that, and I think Mark will bear it out, the bulk of MMA fights are won by strikers, and striking in MMA is similar to boxing. And so there's not a large disconnect there.
Yeah, and people love the knockout, right? No matter what sport, they love the knockout. So, you know, that's why I think Vitor Belfort, well, did he train with Freddie Roach, or who was it? Some of these guys have trained with like Freddie Roach to get better in striking. Maybe it wasn't Belfort. I'm drawing a blank. The Canadian legend. George St. Pierre.
Oh, George St. Pierre. Yeah.
I know he trained with Freddie, and, you know, so you see that. You see a lot of these MMA guys go to boxing coaches to get better. And
yeah.
I think the Iceman, most of his fights were won strikes.
Yeah.
You know?
It's a part of the sport. When they say mixed martial arts, it is the ground aspect of wrestling, but it is striking as well. And if you go into, you know, the majority of the MMA gyms, like you take, for example, one of the gyms here, Syndicate, Sugar Shane Mosley's son was the boxing coach in there in an MMA gym. And because majority of those fights are going to, you know, take place standing up. I had fights this past weekend. They didn't go to the ground at all. It was a 100% stand-up fight. Now, that can encompass, Kenny said he was concerned about safety. What that probably means is those boxers are concerned about getting kicked or elbowed, or, you know, the 8 limbs, as we call it, the other aspects that come back, instead of just the ones and twos. But that is different when you're used to defending boxing and you have somebody throw a kick at you. Your perspective changes a little bit when you get kicked in the leg or in the head for the first time.
Yeah.
no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and you know, the old adage, we've been hearing it for years, boxing is dead. And this is before MMA even is where it is today, right? But in a lot of ways, you know, the feeling is, and I don't know the numbers, but, you know, but HBO going out of the business, Showtime going out of the business. You know, MMA is kind of taken over. It sounds, especially with the younger generation. Do you guys sense that too? And I'll give you an example. Like I covered Spence Crawford in Vegas. You know, being in Dallas, covered Spence for so long here. I had to be at that fight. You know, like waiting and waiting. That was going to be one of the biggest fights I cover. The very next weekend was Nate Diaz and Jake Paul in Dallas. So back-to-back weekends, I'm covering, you know, a crossover fight, or well, I don't know, or Nate Diaz and Jake Paul's not really crossover. Jake's getting into boxing, but the fan base, you know, I'm in T-Mobile Arena. You guys know this. 2 PM. You know, I'm there from the very first fight, and you can hear a pin drop, right? In MMA, when I got to the arena for the MMA fight, that place was almost full, you know, like before the first fight. And so it just told me the marketing that the UFC in particular and MMA does to that community, you know, to where every fight from the undercards, from the prelims are going to be probably competitive, not so much in boxing. Would you guys agree with that synopsis? Start with you, Mark.
I think I can speak on the MMA side, and I have the honor of doing, you know, some of the top promotions are UFC, and then we just had a merger between Bellator and PFL. And what I think is those fights are exciting from the undercard all the way up is because you have a younger generation of hungry fighters that want to get exposure, opportunity, consideration into the top 15, top 10, etc., to look for title contention. And a big part of it is, you know, like the UFC, they give out the big awards: knockout of the night, fight of the night, submission of the night. So it could be a financial incentive as well. You know, you get knockout of the night at the first fight of the night, it's a nice $50,000 paycheck that you get to take back to your family. And as a undercard fighter, their pay scale is probably going to be a little bit different at the base pay. But I agree with you. You know, we show up to the arena pretty early and there are already fans starting to pile in. And again, whether it's the first fight or the 13th fight of the night, most of the time they're going to be exciting.
Right. What about Kenny, Robert? Would you say MMA has kind of taken a lot of that younger fan base just based on what they're putting out there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And fighters want to fight. Certain aspects don't allow them to do that. And when that's not allowed, then something's going to suffer. And that's where we are.
Yeah. The business of boxing is what it's what I'm reading, you know, between the lines. Guys, let's talk about the show though. I mean, I have so much more we could talk about. I mean, we'll do this again. I mean, this is a thrill for me just as a fight fan. Going back to Kenny, you saying about being the fan, you know, wanting to do that. I just love this, you know, the behind the scenes. So talk about your show, because that's what it sounds like to me. It's going to be this behind the scenes. You guys obviously have a mutual respect for each other, a mutual respect for each other's sports, all in Vegas. Who wants to start? What about the show? Let's go with Mark, since he was the first one on the Zoom here.
Well, I will say this and give proper respect where it's due. This opportunity here was an invite from Mr. Byrd, who, along with Kells and Mr. Byrd's son, conceptually came up with this. And my perspective, what we have to do, we always have to get permission from our bosses to do this. And the way I presented it to our boss on the Nevada Boxing Commission, we do seminars, we do Zoom calls, you know, we interact with fans, maybe on social media at the fights. But this is an opportunity to give an inside look at the sport from an official's perspective.
Right.
Got the shows on ESPN like Daniel Cormier and Chael Sonnen where they talk about things as former fighters. But very rare do you get an official's perspective because we are a protected group. We're not going to do an interview after the fight. We're not going to go to the press conference. But maybe fans are a little bit aggravated or concerned about why I stopped the fight or why a judge scored it a certain way. So part of this, we're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about things that we have seen, but we're also going to educate fighters, coaches, fans on what it means to be an official.
That's it.
Go back to the rule set to help them understand what we're doing as officials and help them understand why a judge scored a fight a certain way, why there were point deductions, why I didn't stop the fight when they grabbed the fence, and really give the fans and the fighters a chance to see the fight through the officials' eyes. So they don't yell at us when I stop that fight and understand it was for their best interest. We want to do something different. We want to do something fun. And I'm just very fortunate to have the opportunity with our entire team to get to be able to do this. And I will tell you, Jeff, the fighters, the fans, other friends, other officials, they're excited for this. And what we're finding is a lot of people want to be a part of this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, go ahead, Denny.
no, I was going to add, very, very well said, Mark. You were spot on. But what I would like Robert to do was tell you how it got started, because like Mark said, if it wasn't for Byrd, we wouldn't be here on your show today. Go ahead, Byrd.
Well, actually, I have to give the credit to my son, who knew Kells, who was the executive producer. And what this started out to be was going to be simply a documentary on me. And how it morphed into something else, I don't really know, but I'm glad that it did. And again, like Mark said, it's and I'm a great one for education.
Yes.
And I think that this show is going to, let me give you a classic example. The Hagler Hearns, not the Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard Hagler fight. Me and my son went round and round and round. Yeah, we went round and round and round. And so I told him, I said, wait a minute, let's sit down and we're going to look at this fight. But I want to give you some information first. Okay. This is what boxing criteria is. This is what judges look at when they score the fight. Now we're going to look at the fight because he adamant about, Sugar Ray won this fight, and I said, okay. We looked at the fight round by round, and there was several spots where I stopped it just to show him, see this? You didn't see that the first time around, those body shots. And when I did that and I said to him, once we got through, he said, well, yeah, I guess you're right, Pops, but that was on a small scale. I think we have the opportunity via this show to do that on a larger scale. Because there are some audiences that are very, New Yorkers, very, very knowledgeable about the game, okay? I think this will give us an opportunity to really explain our game, our sport, and let people see it through our eyes. Because like I said, most of them look at it based upon their pocketbook or their heart, okay? And that's not what we do, that's not what we do. That's not how we do our job.
I'm gonna say one more Richard Steele quote that I've heard him say. You guys have heard him say. It was on Legendary Nights, the great HBO documentary shows they used to do from the big fights.
Yes.
Talking about Sugar Ray and Hagler. And he says on that, and get it on YouTube because I may misquote it a little bit, the more and more he watches that fight, the closer and closer it gets. I think he will tell you that Sugar Ray won, but for him to say that, being the third man in the ring, I just think it's a great quote. And I've gone back and watched highlights, and listen, I'm a Sugar Ray guy. That's the guy who got me I became the big fan of boxing with Sugar Ray, and so that's where my rooting interests were. Met Hagler as well, but I just thought it was a great quote, because it's a tough sport. It's just, to judge sometimes and to ref. I think, Mark, it was in your interview with Joe where he says the toughest job in the sport outside of fighting is refereeing. And 100%. And I would say the next toughest, and I did it for a short time, was being a matchmaker. And so, and a judge, of course, but, just on those comments, Mark, just your thoughts.
I will say first and foremost, we all volunteer for this. So it is, if it is tough and if it is stressing, it's self-induced. But there's a level of satisfaction in knowing that as a consummate professional, you do it right. We are our hardest critics, and I can tell you if I feel that I've done something incorrect, or if I could have done something better in a fight, I'm going to be my hardest critic. But we are also such a close network, whether it's Mr. Byrd's wife, Adelaide, who as a judge can give me feedback, or if it's whether it's another referee, or if it's something conceptually as an official that I can talk to Byrd or Bayless about. I may not be able to go into details because it'll be MMA and it'll probably be a little bit too complex for a boxing guy to understand. But we have that rapport where I can reach out to him and get the right answer. And no one is going to be perfect. Even the best mess up. John McCarthy is messed up. Herb Dean is messed up. Mark Smith is messed up. It doesn't matter.
We're human.
Yeah, we're human. Our responsibility is to do our best and be as prepared as possible to try to get it right every single time.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you guys have done and do a hell of a job, and this was great. Now, when will the show? When do we have any dates, or when? I know you guys are working on this as we speak, but anything else you can share that the fans would want to know?
Well, let me just throw this in because I think it's critical. We are the officials in the only sports in which the sole goal is to knock your opponent unconscious. That's the goal that we as officials in our sports have to focus on. And that's the driving force, at least for Mark and for Kenny and myself. That's the driving force behind what we do and why we prepare the way we do.
And to add to that, we're under the microscope. we are watched every minute to every second. And so we have to bring our A game. And like was said earlier, we've all made mistakes. We try to minimize our mistakes because sometimes the sports media is not kind or nice to us. They'll say some disturbing things about officials if the call was not agreed by what they saw, and the list goes on and on and on. So we're in there to do our very best that God has given us. And I can look at Byrd or I can look at Mark or any other official and know that I've done my best, and they've done their best.
And I'll just kind of end on my note. And Kenny talked about a couple things there, as well as did Robert. You're going to get critics on every fight. We go back to that going into every fight. Fans are going to love the blue corner. They're going to love the red corner. So depending upon the call you or the judge make, you're going to be loved or hated. We may not have anything to do other than raising a hand in a decision.
Yes.
You're going to have social media critics. You're going to have, people that are experts on the sport. But our goal is to remind folks and to show them that our old boss used to say, you're the single and the sole arbiter inside that cage.
That's right.
You're the ones who are completely responsible for making the official call.
That's
And
well
that's what our show
spoken.
is going to be about.
Well
Well stated,
spoken,
well
Mark.
stated.
Yeah, let's end it with that, the official call, because guys, this was an honor talking to three legends of combat sports. You guys know where I got my start with your mentors, Kenny and Robert, Richard Steele, and still going strong and still helping the next generation. And Mark, to get to know you on this and learn about your career, and I was just fascinated by your background and how you got to where you are. I mean, I think it's amazing. And I think for people that watch this, you guys are there to help the next generation. Like you said, you're in the ring, you're in the cage, and you're also stoic. They call your name at the beginning and you're standing there, people may not think you're approachable and this and that. And you guys are complete opposite. So, this was great. Let's do it again. And we'll keep an eye out on the show rolling out. Keep me posted, and we'll go from there.
And Mark, I would just like to add, I want to thank you for, I know you're on Central Time, so I know it's late where you are in Dallas, but I want to thank you for staying up and making this happen for the three of us.
Anytime, guys, anytime, man. When Richard called me, Kenny, the other day and said, hey, give Kenny a call, he wants to talk to you. And what, three days later, we're on this, it took us a little while, Mark, right? It took us a little while, for these
Pull those
old guys.
boxing guys in.
Yeah, for the old school boxing guys, it took a little while to get on here, but this has been great, and I can't wait for Richard to see this and just to hear you guys say what you said. So have a good night, and we'll do this again soon.
We appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Everyone stay tuned for that premiere. It's coming your way soon.
Awesome. Thanks.